Hi everyone, and welcome to the Paradigm Shifters Book Club. Now this is part 3 of Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice by Rupa Maria and Raj Patel. Rupa Maria is a professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and Raj Patel is a research professor at University of Texas. Now, in case you didn't see it in part 1, just to review, we looked at the main ideas in the book and their extraordinary implications for all our lives. And we discovered that the diseases we should really worry about most are the chronic inflammatory ones, less so the infectious diseases, because they impact humanity at a much higher rate, and because the environment plays a key role, they're more preventable than we seem to realize. Even though so far we seem to be doing very little about it, and we could and should be making a huge difference to human health. And then we went on to part 2, where we unpacked what chronic inflammation actually means, how it drives the worst of our diseases, and what it has to do with the bacterial colonies in our gut. And this is part 3. And so now we're going to get right into the nuts and bolts of what causes chronic disease. Now that's the key info that puts the power of health into our hands. So we'll be looking at 8 main types of environmental cause of chronic inflammatory disease. Most of those are covered in depth in this book, but I might add a little more. And in this video, I want to probe the depths of how our environment can affect us psychologically in ways that potentially create chronic inflammatory disease in the body. And since some of that is based on my own research and experience as a psychologist, I will make it clear when I'm talking about stuff that's related to the book, but not exactly in the book. So most of what I'll share with you in this video comes from Inflamed, but I'll be reordering it a bit and presenting it in my own way and adding a little bit of my own spice. But I will let you know, as I said. So let's begin to look at 8 major categories of things that have been inflaming us. And that's going to tell us how we can reduce the global plague of chronic inflammatory disease. Okay, number 1, our soils. Our soils are becoming sterile. Now, why are scientists talking more and more about soil health and gut health in the same sentence? This is because microbial biodiversity is in alarming decline all across the soils that have been farmed conventionally. Because, as it turns out, chemical fertilizers and pesticides are literally killing our soils. These chemicals decimate the microorganisms that make soils rich, ultimately starving the soil of its natural fertility. And so, the more that farmers use these chemicals, the more that they have to use these chemicals, the more dependent they become, because the soils are getting progressively poorer. So from one season to the next, they're using more of the same stuff. And this becomes increasingly expensive for the farmer. But this is a fabulous business model if you're selling the chemicals. For the rest of us, this is having a devastating impact downstream on the nutritional content of our food. As a result, humanity has already lost and is continuing to lose at an alarming rate a lot of the natural biodiversity that's in our gut microbiome. As I was saying earlier, this puts us on a one-way street to chronic inflammatory disease en masse. According to the authors of this book, rates of chronic inflammatory disease are rising, especially in places where the soils are increasingly sterile, as caused by industrial farming. A rich diversity of gut bacteria is utterly dependent on a rich diversity of soil bacteria. So in a nutshell, starved soil means starved produce. It means a starved gut. It means an inflamed gut, which then means the risk of chronic inflammatory disease. So more and more experts are imploring big agribusiness to stop using pesticides and industrial fertilizers. This need is becoming more urgent every year. Now, we know how to grow complex food ecosystems with multiple crops at industrial scale, instead of the monocultures that are so vulnerable to pests and disease. The idea that we must use synthetic fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides at large scale is a myth. In fact, the new scientific approaches to regenerative agriculture get far better results without any of the nasty chemicals. But more about that in the next video. So for now, let's move on to number 2. The pesticides and the synthetic chemicals themselves. Quick quiz. Do you know how many human-made chemicals exist today? Have you had a guess? It's over 144,000. Every day we are swimming in a chemical soup, even if we don't see it. It's hard to even get our heads around that one. What's the public health impact of just one of those chemicals? What about the combination of a whole lot of these chemicals together on our skins, in our air, our food, our water? 144,000. Good luck trying to test that. Now, pesticide residues in our food are pretty much impossible to completely wash off. There are traces of this stuff everywhere. It's in baby formula, it's in baby food, it's in beer, it's in wine, it's in most of our food. And now, our gut bacteria don't like these chemicals at all. Here's something that shocked me when I read about it in this book. Pesticides and chemical fertilizers used in industrial monoculture can actually disrupt our gut bacteria worse than taking a course of antibiotics. Worse than a course of antibiotics? I'm still reeling from that one. And speak of the devil, that takes us to number 3, the overuse of antibiotics. By now, I'm sure you know that antibiotics badly disrupt our gut microbiota, and this quickly leads to inflammation unless we replace the good gut bacteria after treatment. And that's not so easy to do. The gut microbiome is incredibly complex. So there's definitely a movement to put the brakes on antibiotic use, except when it's too risky not to. But what you may not have known is that 70% of antibiotics are not actually used for sick humans. They are used routinely in the industrial farming of animals and fish. Now, they wouldn't need to pump antibiotics into every creature if they didn't pack them all together into massively overpopulated, artificial, and horribly unecological environments. The only beneficiary there is the investor. Invisibly and silently, antibiotics in our industrially farmed meats, poultry, and fish are stripping our gut microbiome and further opening us up to out of control inflammation. So we need to remove these antibiotics from our food chain. And that takes us to number 4, the food we eat. Now, of course, we're not all affected by foods in exactly the same way. Having said that, certain modern foods do come up again and again as inflammation-inducing culprits in the research literature. And you've probably already heard, in particular, cane sugar and refined carbohydrates, such as in non-wholemeal breads and pastas, are high on the list of gut inflaming factors, especially as they have both become such a dominant staple in our diets. Sugar and refined carbohydrates nourish and multiply the undesirable bacteria in our gut, throwing the whole gut ecology out of balance. And this is what they call dysbiosis. And dysbiosis starts to inflame the gut. Today, there is so much sugar added not just in junk food, but to almost all of our packaged food, breakfast cereals, condiments, etc. So it's become so hard to avoid it. And then there's the ubiquitous chemical additives such as colouring, preservatives, flavourings that also play havoc with the microbial balance in our gut. These processed, chemically altered, starchy and sugary foods form a major part of the modern diet. And with all the added sugars, fats and salts, the most convenient foods can be incredibly moreish and highly addictive. So it's a perfect storm. We're surrounded by an infinity of gut-inflaming, factory-made foods made cheaply, convenient and addictive, and then normalized and glamorized by advertisers. Collectively, the human gut microbiome is in crisis. You could say it's under attack, and the skyrocketing levels of chronic disease tell us that the gut microbiome is on the ropes. Until food and advertising are properly regulated for public health, reclaiming ownership over our gut microbiome does feel like we're swimming against the cultural tide. The situation is code red, and here is a quote from the authors. Added sugar is a cause of diabetes and is linked to heart and liver disease, dementia, cancer, and an expanding range of other metabolic ills. It's that blunt and unequivocal. The modern diet is wrecking our health. But there's another inflammatory factor that doesn't get talked about anywhere near enough. And it is this. Number 5, air pollution. Our super highly urbanized populations are breathing it in and out all day long. Air pollution is the cigarette that never gets stubbed out. Now, if that sounds a bit too dramatic, well, check this out. Air pollution is the world's 4th leading risk factor for premature death. 9 million people die annually as a direct result of inhaling the air where they live. Now, conservatively, that's on par with tobacco deaths. 9 million deaths. Now, that's a shocking amount. How does this kind of pollution inflame us? Well, it's the particulate matter in the air that generates an inflammatory response in our bodies. The emerging research presented by the authors is grim. If you guessed that air pollution is bad news for the lungs, well, of course you'd be right. It's implicated in all kinds of respiratory diseases like asthma and emphysema. It makes us more susceptible to respiratory infections such as pneumonia, bronchitis and tuberculosis, and you can add lung cancer to that list. But the real damage list is much longer than that. To begin with, the fine particulate pollution like soot, sulfate, nitrate particles, etc. generally destabilize the human immune response, making us more vulnerable to infectious diseases. Air pollution accelerates the death of the endothelial cells that line our blood vessels, which leads straight to heart disease. With all their air pollution, cities have 40% more depression, 20% more anxiety, double the rate of schizophrenia compared to rural spaces. Even prenatal exposure to air pollution has been associated with the rise of autism in children. And if you hadn't guessed it already, the main source of air pollution is fossil fuel. That overstaying anachronism. Our love affair with the internal combustion engine is literally wiping us out. Back in pandemic times, fossil fuel pollution was a chief villain. And the authors of Inflamed say this: an increase of only 1 microgram of particulate matter per cubic meter of air was associated with an 8% increase in the COVID death rate. And then they say, and this is a quote again, COVID settles disproportionately into the lungs of those who have been exposed to air pollution, which explains why the COVID pandemic spread most rapidly in cities where high pollution levels prevailed. Now, the same was true, by the way, during the 1918 Spanish flu. Cities that burned more coal had tens of thousands more deaths. Now, the more inflamed we are, the more defenseless we are when a virus comes our way. And so, among other vital measures, we might like to get a wriggle on with our full transition to renewables before the next pandemic strikes. Now, as the world begins to assimilate the new science of inflammation and its implications, most people still believe that it's caused by physical toxins that we inhale, eat, drink, or absorb through our skin. Either that or some kind of prolonged deficiency in our diet. But that is only the half of it. Our psychological environment is equally important and has just as powerful an impact on our gut microbiome, gut health, and general inflammatory state. Which leads us to number 6, psychological trauma and chronic stress. And I would say that one of the key takeaways from Inflamed is that stress affects every system in the body because stress goes straight to the gut. Overwhelming stress is one of the most damaging factors on the gut microbiome. It's like a demolition ball through the gut bacterial colonies. By releasing inflammatory cytokines, stress mobilizes a strong inflammatory response that can travel through the body. So, if you ever found yourself more prone to catching a cold or a flu when you're emotionally stressed, well, now you know why. The inflammatory effects of stress can knock the stuffing out of our immune system. Now, to be clear, humans are able to endure acute peaks of stress without lasting harm. And in fact, sometimes we are even strengthened by the challenges that stress can bring. But when stress is unrelenting and structured into our lives and that we feel powerless to change it, that is when inflammation starts to cause the damage. But personal traumas are not the only type of trauma that affects us. Societal trauma, in other words, collective traumas that are experienced by an entire cohort of people. I'm going to call that our number 7 environmental cause. Now, central to the thesis put forward in this book is the author's narrative about colonialism. They use the framework of colonialism to portray all societal systems that involve the willful disempowerment of a group of people by an overbearing and exploitative elite. Whether the oppressive agent involves a caste system or a class hierarchy or an economic tyranny, a colonial subjugation, really any stratified allocation of power will use some form of violence or subterfuge to suppress and disadvantage entire groups of people. The lens of inflammation becomes an incredibly enlightening way to quantify the negative impact of colonial systems of all stripes. The authors present a boatload of research showing that folks at the bottom of the pyramid are afflicted by inflammatory disease at much higher rates. People that find themselves trapped in cycles of poverty and debt have increased levels of C-reactive protein, which is a biomarker of inflammation. All across the world, the poorer the person, the more C-reactive protein there is in their blood, as well as elevated levels of pro-inflammatory cytokines. Now, according to Rupa Maria and Raj Patel, that goes a long way to explaining why death rates for COVID were particularly high among groups at the bottom of socio-economic ladders. And this ladder has been getting steeper and more unassailable year by year. So that's what domination does. It inflames the dominated. Now, there's one more type of psychological stress that has enormous inflammatory impacts. This book right here does not give this type of stress that much airplay, and I'm not sure why. Perhaps the authors feel it doesn't belong in a book that focuses mainly on the effects of colonialism. Now, I would argue differently. I think the first colonialism is the colonizing of childhood, and in fact, this might have the most calamitous inflammatory effects of all. So, briefly, I want to depart from the body of this book and speak from my own area of knowledge as a psychologist. And I'm going to call this environmental cause of inflammation number 8, unhealed childhood trauma. Through a pathway known as the gut-brain axis, our digestive tract and our brains form this intertwined alliance of mutual influence. And as I said earlier, a chronically inflamed gut can inflame the brain and trigger depression, even psychosis. But the influence can also go the other way. So a brain in trauma or in high levels of emotional stress can alter gut chemistry in ways that will wipe out entire populations of healthy bacterial species, throwing the whole gut ecology right out of balance. Unhealed emotional pain goes straight to the gut. And that's how childhood developmental trauma tunes the immune system towards systemic inflammation. Traumas that afflict us in our formative years hit particularly hard. These are traumas such as early separation from family, dysfunctional relationships at home, authoritarian or punitive parenting, physical or sexual abuse, etc. Now, all of these can send the gut down an inflammatory track, which then conditions the body for a host of chronic diseases later in life. There's an enormous body of research famously kick-started by the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study of the 1990s, which was a joint venture of the Center for Disease Control and the Kaiser Permanente Hospital in the USA. And this very large study on the lifelong impacts of childhood trauma, which gave rise to a wave of follow-up studies all around the world, proved to be nothing less than a major turning point, which absolutely revolutionized how the world understands the lifetime effects of childhood trauma. Now, what this body of research so graphically illustrates is the way that psychology becomes biology. Now, here's just a glimpse at what the researchers found. When an individual has suffered a high level of traumatic childhood experiences, This can increase the risk of a whole host of chronic inflammatory diseases later in life, including, but not limited to, for example, heart disease, 220% greater risk. Stroke, 160%. The various pulmonary diseases, up by 390%. Depression, 460%. So adverse childhood experiences are also understood to be an important factor driving the incidence of some cancers as well. The list just goes on. And beyond the adverse experiences measured in those studies, there's a whole new field of research exposing a number of key disruptions to the gut microbiome in early childhood, even among stable and functional families. For example, it's now well understood that babies' gut microbiome receive an absolutely critical initial seeding by maternal bacteria as they pass through the birth canal in natural vaginal childbirth. Now, this essential building block of gut health and immunity is dumped by the escalating rates of elective caesarean, which has climbed to levels way past the recommended rates. And the science of human lactation makes it clear that natural breastfeeding to full term provides babies with another vital source of gut bacteria, which is shed directly from the mother's body. Both of those foundational factors in gut health and immune system strength have been devastatingly compromised by an aggressive hyper-commercialization of childbirth and infant feeding. Now think about what this means. A huge proportion, perhaps over half, of individuals in the modern world begin our lives with a significant handicap to the development of healthy gut and diverse gut bacterial colonies, and therefore a normal immune system. So is it any wonder that our children are getting sicker, weaker, and more allergic? Is it any wonder that chronic diseases are booming around the world? And you'll note that these developmental traumas affecting infant attachment are not limited to disadvantaged communities. They happen in the homes of the privileged as well. The all too common degradation of babies' basic attachment needs is anything but a marginal occurrence. It's culturally normal. So no wonder childhood experiences are such a major contributor to chronic disease. Now, in my book, Parenting for a Peaceful World, I covered the psychological needs of early childhood in depth, from the prenatal to school-aged stages of development. But what I did not yet know at the time of writing is the fact that developmental traumas also leave a significant footprint in the body's inflammatory systems. I don't believe a study of colonization and its inflammatory effects is complete without looking at the impacts of the colonization of childhood. Okay, now those were 8 major types of environmental factors that inflame our bodies and cause chronic disease. And that wasn't necessarily a comprehensive list. You might know about more factors that push our inflammation buttons, and if you do, please mention those in the comments section below. I would love to hear your ideas. Now, I don't know about you, but to me, all those factors seem largely preventable. Some easy, some hard. Many we cannot prevent by ourselves, and we need to join forces with others. But can we allow ourselves to imagine what would happen if we took bold steps towards removing the things that are making us chronically sick? What would the world look like? And what can we do to make a difference for ourselves, for our children, for our communities, for our nations? That's what I'll be talking about in the final part of this series, part 4, in which we roll our sleeves up and look at real life, practical and societal solutions based on the implications of this book, Inflamed, Deep Medicine and the Anatomy of Injustice. So before I go, I have a super easy favor to ask you. If you appreciate the content of my videos and the purpose of my videos, please hit the like button and subscribe. It's free and it helps me to keep this work going. And if you enjoyed this video, I think you'll like the other articles and videos that are in my Substack. So why not visit me there? The address is on screen. Thank you for watching. I look forward to bringing you part 4. Adios for now.